Hi, I'm Claire Sauer, and we're so lucky to have three very distinguished people here to have our informal chat about voting in Connecticut. To my right is Andrew Schatz, who is president of the American Civil Liberties Union in Connecticut, and then Sherry Quickmeyer, who's executive director of Common Cause, and on the far right is Matt Wagner from Fairfield Registrar of Voters and a League of Women Voters member. And yes, we do have men in the League of Women Voters, and we do encourage them to join. It's a special treat for me to be here with these three people because they represent my three favorite organizations. I've been a member of the League of Women Voters and the American Civil Liberties Union for over 60 years. And the only reason I haven't been a member of Common Cause for 60 years is John Gardner didn't get around to forming it until the early 1970s. But all three organizations do such wonderful work in a nonpartisan manner, and they accomplish a great deal on a variety of issues. But today we're going to be talking mainly about voting, but maybe you'd each like to just say a word about your organization and how it ties in. You want to start, Andy?
Sure. The American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, is the nation's foremost protector of civil liberties, protecting rights of individuals against overreach by their governments. And in connection with voting, the interest that we're protecting here is the principle of one person, one vote. And part of that is making sure democracy works as best as possible and that as many people can vote as possible. So the ACLU nationally has been involved in litigation in dozens of states which have tried to restrict voting. In Connecticut, it's actually worked the other way. Connecticut has been very progressive on voting, and we're talking here about something that we're trying to change in Connecticut to make it more progressive, sort of a peculiar quirk that our Constitution, unlike most states which have always done this by legislation, our Constitution prevents us from voting other than Election Day, except for absentee ballots, which are restricted to specific excuses. By changing that, we would be encouraging more people to vote, which would make our democracy work more effectively.
Sherry, you want to say something about Common Cause?
I do, thank you. I love that you said that it was only in the 1970s that John Gardner started Common Cause. And in fact, we are approaching our 45th anniversary as one of the original citizens lobbies here in the country. We have chapters in 35 states, and including here in Connecticut. And I'm very pleased that we've done so much work on voting rights and on increasing the options, the opportunities for folks to participate in democracy. And this initiative, as Andy said, really does have to do with giving an opportunity to more people to have a better democracy and more people to participate.
Thanks. Matt?
Well, I'm here wearing two hats today. I'm Fairfield's Registrar of Voters, one of two that we have. And in that setting, I administer the elections. I register voters all year long. And at election time, I help set up the polling places, train the poll workers, and I sort of have a good on-the-ground feel for what happens in our elections. I'm also here with the League of Women Voters, and I'm a member of the Fairfield League. And the League is a statewide and actually national nonpartisan organization. They do a lot of civic engagement. They talk about voting issues, but they also talk about other policy issues. And what I found is that they're really excellent in fostering debate, and they have a much more sort of democratic, small d democratic process for engaging the membership from top to bottom to sort of determine what they're going to talk about. And as a registrar, one of the things that I've done that's maybe a little bit unusual is I go up and I speak about election issues at the state capitol. So I'm up there talking about this constitutional amendment. I've spoken about that a couple of times, election day registration and other issues that come up to try and provide some information to our legislators about, really what they should expect with what they pass.
Great. Well, as I said, I'm hardly impartial. I've held state board positions on all three of the organizations, and I think they're all great organizations. To get us started on our discussion about the voting, we have some slides that we'd like to show you. I just have to caution on the, one of the slides, it says 27 states and the District of Columbia offer in-person early voting. It should read 27 states and the District of Columbia offer no excuse absentee voting. There is a difference. So could we see those slides?
Democracy is not a spectator sport. Voting November 4, 2014. Pass the amendment, start the conversation. The 2014 Constitutional Amendment. On November 4th, Election Day, voters will decide, should we amend Connecticut's Constitution? What happens in other states? Most states offer opportunities to cast ballots before Election Day. 33 states and the District of Columbia offer early voting in person. 27 states and the District of Columbia offer in-person early voting. 3 states allow mail voting. Connecticut is one of just 14 states that restrict general election voting to one day, Tuesday. In states that allow it, voters increasingly choose alternative voting methods. Texas, 62% of votes were cast early in the 2012 election. Iowa, 66,000 voters registered on Election Day. Nevada, 70% of voters cast their ballots before Election Day 2012. How does the state constitution restrict voting in Connecticut? On Election Day in Connecticut, all ballots must be cast in person, except in cases of illness, disability, absence, or religious prohibitions. Do we have to adopt this amendment before our legislators can even look at voting alternatives? In a word, yes. What will a yes vote mean? Restrictive language will be removed from the Constitution. The legislature will be enabled to consider various early voting methods. Voters will decide what works best via the General Assembly, introducing bills, public hearings, debates, and letting the majority rule in a vote. What will a no vote mean? There will be no alternatives to in-person voting on Election Day. No expanded use of absentee ballots. Have there been previous amendments to Connecticut's Constitution? Yes. Connecticut's Constitution has been amended 33 times since 1965. What Connecticut election changes would you like to see in place? For more information, go to http://www.lwvsect.org. Thank you.
Bare bones of a description of what the constitutional amendment will be on the ballot. Maybe we can talk a little bit more, flesh it out as to exactly what it will do and what it will not do. You want to give us a start, Sherry?
Oh, I'm happy to. I will say that this is not a surprise, and that the amendment has gone through the General Assembly 2 times, actually. through both chambers and now is coming to the voters. That's how we amend the Constitution in this state, and it's not an easy process, and it's not a quick process, but that's as it should be. That Constitution should be something that we're thoughtful about amending, and this is a great opportunity for us to look at how it is that we can make our elections better. And I think that folks that I speak with around the state have been very, very excited about it. In fact, have said that we think that people in general think that Connecticut's done a fair job of enacting positive changes to our elections, and has provided additional opportunities, Election Day registration last year and online voter registration, and we are looking to make the experience better for voters as we move forward.
Anybody want to add anything to that about what the amendment itself will not do, that it does not in itself?
Well, I think as we pointed out before, the amendment it does not prescribe what is going to happen. It doesn't say that that you can only vote these times or that time. It simply opens it up to the legislature to make that decision. And the legislature will have to consider a lot of different factors. I mean, for example, to be sure, you wouldn't want to have early voting be 8 weeks before the election. There are a lot of reasons that the legislature will probably not look upon that favorably. But it's been shown in other states that folks, when they are given the opportunity to vote early, do. I'm sure all of us have examples of folks who, either at the day of the election, there was something that came up, it didn't justify an absentee ballot under our current system, but it's the kind of normal activity. Your kids are going nuts. It's 6, 7 o'clock at night. You can only get to the polls until 8. You shouldn't have to take that chance. You should be able to vote if you want to.
What about any disadvantages to it? Every organization that I know of is supporting it, but is there any reason to oppose it?
I don't see a lot of disadvantage. I don't see any disadvantages, frankly. but I will say that, just to expand on what Andy said, there are specific situations that folks really are in a position of not being able to vote. Anyone who's a caregiver for someone who can't leave the house, and if they can't leave that individual, then they aren't allowed to vote. But by the way that it's stated in the Constitution, they are not ill themselves and they are not disabled in any way, but so therefore they should be able to vote, but they can't. So we need to really look carefully when we start thinking about how it is we want this to look, that folks who commute long distances and maybe take a 6:15 in the train in the morning and don't get back until late at night, or the train doesn't move late at night and they don't get here until way later and they miss it completely. We need to look at all these options and think about how it is that we can make the opportunity, make it possible for everyone to participate.
I'd like to hear a little bit about the protections that I think Matt can probably tell. But before that, Andy, can you discuss something about other states? Did you want to?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of states, as you saw on the slides. There are 33 states that now allow early voting. There are 27 states that have much broader use of absentee ballots than we do. One of the things we're seeing within the American Civil Liberties Union is that a number of those states, and we think it's really for political purposes, are making the decision to try to restrict early voting. They're actually trying to cut down on it because people have been taking advantage of it. Probably not coincidentally, you see that when those decisions are made, it's generally done by a legislature of one party thinking that it can gain an advantage by cutting down the voting by folks who are likely to be supporting the other party. And that's a shame, because I think one of the things that not only our organizations, but I think everybody agrees with, is that we want to encourage everybody to vote. To the extent we could get 100% of people voting, we would. And one of the things that's been a problem, and you hear this, and I remember hearing this from the time I was a school kid, is they say that there are other countries that have much higher percentages of folks voting than in the United States. And part of that is that a lot of those countries have voting on weekends and always have. They make it easy for folks to vote, whereas we have a single Tuesday on a single day in a month that's cold in many parts of the country, and it really discourages turnout.
One of the things that Andy said actually is that talking about the candidates and how political entities will see election laws as a way to gain advantage. I think that's one of the concerns. If you say, well, what's a concern that people have, is the election laws serve both the voters and the office holders, the candidates. And for candidates, it changes the election, the nature of campaigns. They're not exactly sure what's going to happen. Will it be that they have to send out their mail months earlier than they had? That's the political process changes for them, and they're not sure they're going to like it. They know the one thing that everyone in the legislature has in common is they were all elected under the rules we have now, right? So any change to those rules is going to be somewhat controversial with them. But for voters, I think we're moving in the direction of making things more convenient, I think possibly more secure. And I don't think that there's any cost to the voter or to the integrity of the election in terms of what you can expect the outcome to be. It may change what the campaign is, and a lot of people say, well, do I need to get mail even earlier, or phone calls and door knocking even earlier than I do now? That may be something that people don't enjoy, but I think the election process is meant to serve the voters, and I think it will.
It's interesting that I have to throw in a little personal thing here, because I was in the Connecticut State Legislature for 6 years, and I know the difference between the inside and the outside. The reason I'm so excited about these three organizations is that I think it's more important to be outside pushing than on the inside waiting to be pushed. I mean, I don't like the idea of politician being used as a pejorative. We need politicians, and many of them are very good, but they are concerned about being reelected. And I don't know if it's apocryphal, but I was told that Franklin Roosevelt had some union people and telling him things that they wanted, and he said, I agree, now make me do it. And so politicians lead from behind, and it's up to these organizations to provide the push to get these things done. Some people are concerned that there could be some hanky-panky things going wrong, and as a registrar of voters, I think that you have a perception of whether that's a real problem or not.
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. I would say that absentee ballots, and that's when we talk about this expansion, there are a couple of different things that could happen. We could expand the use of absentee ballots so more people can access them. We could open up polling places on days other than Election Day, and a number of states do that. We could allow all mail voting. Towns or in a lot of states, counties will have everyone be just mailed a ballot automatically. There are a number of different ways we could go, and I think you see that absentee voting is attractive for people who do want to perhaps behave dishonorably in the elections, break the laws, because they don't need to appear somewhere in person, right? That's a concern that if you were going to vote in the name of someone else, and I think more than it being people abusing the system, I think people will vote for their spouses or children a lot. That's a legitimate problem that we see a lot. That's much more common than impersonation. People say, well, my husband's away, but I know how he wants to vote, so I'm going to fill out this ballot for him. So I think the thing to keep in mind is that we have a few different scenarios where people use absentee ballots. One is someone who is out of town every day. They commute. And sometimes these people will commute after the polls open. They'll leave for work at 7 in the morning, and they'll vote for convenience. Those people right now are breaking the law. You have some people who would like to vote absentee and don't, because they take this rule seriously. They read, will you swear that you're going to be out of town on Election Day? And they say, well, I can't really swear that. And in Fairfield, an experience we had is we've had storms in 2 recent elections, including Storm Sandy. And people who would like to have voted early weren't sure if they were going to be back on election day or not. They didn't want to put themselves in the situation where they're lying, so those people were disenfranchised. And the third group is someone who really is voting in the name of someone else. I think that's very, very small in number. But this checkbox saying, I swear I'm not going to be in town on election day, it provides no obstacle to that person whatsoever. So I think if you want to increase the security of the system, there are a number of things you can do. You can say, well, we're going to have absentee ballot applications issued online in the way that the online voter registration system, which was a part of the election day registration bill that passed, where people, where you can track who's getting these applications. You can have signature matching, which a number of states who have expansive early voting do. These are things that you can do. They're not necessarily free, but you can increase the security by quite a lot while also expanding access to the ballot. So I think that's where I'd like to see us go. I think that that'll be something that they consider when they talk about how do we expand it. It's what additional safeguards do we want to put in that will give people that confidence that the system is going to maintain the integrity of our elections.
So it looks like even after this amendment passes, these organizations are not going to be able to say our job is done. We'll have to see how these laws are brought into effect to make sure that they are fair to everybody and accomplish what we're really trying to do. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it is a good opportunity for folks with Matt's experience or other election officials to say this works particularly well in my state, or this could work well in my community. And I think we will have a chance during the legislative session to have those conversations and for legislators in this state to be educated about how this works or this may work in other states. So that is one good thing about the process. And I will also say that in Connecticut, we also have an elections enforcement commission that has the opportunity to actually investigate if there are questions about what's happened in a particular jurisdiction, and the state's attorney's office, which can prosecute if there are any real improprieties. And we're fortunate to have that system already in place, and we can continue to move forward.
I've been discouraged in just talking to people in general, not Common Cause, League of Women Voters, ACLU. Oh, there's an amendment on the ballot? I didn't know that. What efforts are we all making to see that the word gets out? Anybody?
Well, Andy and I have been working with a loose committee of about 20 organizations called Vote Yes Connecticut, and we've been speaking around the state, we've been sharing information with voters, and our organizational members have been doing the same, and we have a website where people can go to see or ask, have more questions answered, called voteyessect.org. And we're always happy to come and speak to groups. We don't, because we're a small and not particularly well-financed operation. We are hopefully going to be able to do some advertising right before the election, but at this point that hasn't happened. So we're hoping that word of mouth will spread the word.
I think programs like this are very important. Every time there's a ballot initiative, referendum question, you have people come up to you afterwards and say they didn't see it, they didn't know it was there, and so it's just important to get the word out, because when you go to vote, whether it's an absentee ballot or whether you're at the polls, there'll be a question, and if you don't see it, make sure you ask the moderator. It's not going to be in the same place in every ballot throughout the state, which is a problem.
But it will be question one.
It'll be question one on the ballot. It'll appear on the voting machine. So
do we have a copy of a ballot? We can just
right, because in different towns there are local referendum that people maybe.
So here's
facing. Here's an
a sample,
example.
and over on the right side, you have the question. And there may be other questions that are local questions below it, but that question will be there.
And I guess that some ballots it will be in a different place, is that right? But
Possibly.
just be sure to look for it someplace. It will be there,
Question 1.
right? And Matt, you want to What
talk
is
about
it?
the league? Well, I mean, the league is prepared, and you saw the slideshow, which is actually a product of the League of Women Voters. The league has done a lot of research on this and has a pamphlet that they're distributing. I know it's in Fairfield County, a number of the registrar's offices, and they're doing it, providing it at tables and at community events locally. I can tell you registrars as a community are divided on the question of whether to move forward with the amendment. There's sort of different thinking about whether it's our job to foster change in the system or whether it's something that is brought to us perhaps with some reluctance.
This is the way we've always done it.
Right, so both groups are nonpartisan. The league does have a position in support. Registrars, I would say, are pretty evenly divided on the question.
I don't know of any organizations that are opposed to it. It seems that most of the good government organizations are all working for
And
it.
in fact, when it went through the General Assembly, it passed in both chambers without a tremendous opposition, and folks were genuinely interested in seeing how it is we can expand the franchise, and it was supported by the Secretary of the State and the Governor, and I think that we're looking for additional support as we go forward.
And as you said, Claire, this is not the end of the issue, but the beginning, because once it goes to the legislature, assuming it passes, I think those organizations may be on different sides of certain specific issues. How long before do you allow early voting? How many days of early voting do you allow? Do you make them during the week, on weekends, in the evenings, whatever? I think the goal of all these organizations, though, has been to increase the number of folks voting.
Right.
And I think this is an opportunity to do that. And I think we all have to keep our eye on the legislature and work at that point to make sure that all of the changes are made with the idea of increasing voting rather than decreasing voting, or particularly what's happened in other states, which is decreasing the likelihood that certain groups will be voting.
You don't think our job is ever going to be done. We'll always be working for further good government things to be accomplished.
That's probably true.
And there's other things in voting. Go ahead.
And well, of course, the other thing is, should the legislature decide something, as the question was raised, I mean, yes, the legislators are always, in addition to whatever their concern is about all of us and everyone voting, they are concerned about getting elected for sure. And to the extent that the legislature were to make some decisions which appeared to be countered against the interest of the voters generally and in their own interest, we could come back with another ballot question and be more specific. But I think right now the thought was, rather than try to decide in a constitutional amendment specifically what should be done, only to then have to come back with another constitutional amendment in 2 years or 4 years, better to leave it open, let the legislature look at this, look at the 30-odd states that have already done this, get lessons that they've learned, and then put them into legislation that makes sense.
It all goes back to this basic thing that the things in the Constitution should be very, very basic. Other things are more appropriate for the legislature to handle.
Sure.
Is there other issues in voting besides this amendment that we might want to just touch on? It seems that there's so much discouragement. People are turned off by politics, by the money. Any comments on how you feel about any of this? I think there might be some differences of opinion here, which is all right.
Well, before we get into that, I'm always happy to talk about those issues. But I think what's really important about this, and it's the reason I think we all agree, is that not only is there this ideal we have of democracy and everyone voting, but in addition, to the extent that you include people in the voting process, you have a potential practical impact of avoiding alienation and ultimately of avoiding folks taking other means, whether it's violence or other things. And I think that you can get folks to recognize that they really can make an impact within the system of voting. And I think that's what we're all focusing on,
Yes.
and that's where we all have agreement. Once you get beyond that, obviously, the issue of how many ads we see out there, I mean, the comment was made that we may, I suppose, in theory, might see more from this. I think as a practical matter now, having run for office, as Claire, I know you have, the absentee ballots now would go out sometime in early October. By that time, you knew that you had to get all of your literature out to people because they could be voting. And I think that's not going to change. So I think that there's still, a lot of it's going to remain the same, even with early voting.
I would say that one of the features sort of our elections now, that this is something that's changing over time, is that elections are competing with so many other things for people's attention, right? That this question is competing with 400 candidates here in Connecticut, people running for statewide offices, for state rep, state legislature, registrar of voters, judge of probate. And, every single moment of people's attention, they're guarding it jealously. People don't necessarily want the information that you're trying to give to them. I actually read recently that there are 1 million elected officials in the United States. 1 out of every 300 people is elected to something.
Dog catchers included.
Right. And so the amount of election information that people have to absorb and to try and comprehend, okay, really, how should I choose for my zoning board? How should I choose for my judge of probate? Is a challenge, I think, is becoming more difficult. People have less time in their day, and we're asking for more of it. So I think that the system will evolve, whether it's campaign finance, whether it's election administration, to try and better accommodate people where they are in their lives now.
It brings up the question, which we can't solve here, and probably shouldn't even try, is maybe all of those positions should not be elected. Maybe some of them should be appointed. I leave that as an open question.
I think that's an important question, though, at some point. And I think that points that Andy made about folks not feeling engaged and in some ways feeling really discouraged by the system and the process and the results at different occasions is a very important one. And I think that there have been and continue to be efforts around the country to discourage particular populations, particularly communities of color, from participating in elections. And I think that that's something that I'm proud to say that Connecticut is not in a position of being one of those so-called pre-clearance states that were impacted by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But I'm discouraged that we do have states where we're having to address that today in 2014. And I'm encouraged that we are moving forward here in this state.
Just so it's clear, actually, one of the problems is that the pre-clearance under the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was struck down by the Supreme Court a year ago. And so the states where it has been a problem are exactly those states where the ACLU and other organizations are having to litigate attempts to restrict voting. And if you want to see the details on that at any point, just go to aclu.org or our state affiliate acluct.org. And there's just, as I say, there's dozens of these cases that have been brought throughout the country. Fortunately, Connecticut has taken steps over the last number of years to make voting easier and easier, and this is another step along those lines.
Because there's always work for the ACLU to do, but I think, as you've pointed out in the past, in Connecticut, a lot of it is working proactively towards trying to get legislation passed where we're not having to sue everybody because they're doing such horrible things here in Connecticut.
That's right. As I've said many times, that's the way that civil liberties battles can really stay won. Otherwise, you're tilting at those windmills all the time. But we do that on the state level. We do it on the local level, and I think that folks like Matt, who are working hard at the local level to do the right thing, are real important.
One thing I guess I'd like to add, just that's unique about us in Connecticut, compared to a lot of the states where you do see these more restrictive laws coming about, is that we are, in the Northeast and in Connecticut in particular, much more dense than most of the country. We have a much greater density of population. Even in our rural areas, people live much more closely together than they do in most of the country. What that allows us to do is we have more people voting per polling place than in most places. We have more people overseeing the elections and providing voter registration opportunities. No one lives 20 miles from their polling place in our state. And so for us, we have those economies of scale where we can say, well, let's add a new service, and it's not unreasonable to do, because if you were looking at the Midwest or the Mountain West, it may be a very different scenario for them to try and even maintain a service that they're providing now. Our urban-rural divide, which is it turns into a discriminatory impact when you say we're going to restrict early voting. In Connecticut, we don't really face those same challenges because everywhere in Connecticut, by sort of census standards, it's considered an urban area. Even our country towns in the hills.
That's an interesting point, yes, it makes it easier. Well, what else are you working on your
Well, before we get
organization?
off this, one thing I
Fine, you can.
wanted to throw out there, which is that to the extent you're talking with folks and they try to give you reasons not to support this, the two reasons I guess that you hear all the time and that are used to try to justify the takebacks, the restrictions on early voting that you're seeing in other states are fraud and undue influence. And Matt, you may be able to talk better about this than I can, but I can tell you that I have seen little or no evidence of fraud in connection with early voting. And to the extent that the undue influence is really much more in the absentee ballot area that you've talked about, early voting will tend to make sure that you have folks who are able to do their own voting early and not have to resort even to an absentee ballot. So I think there's less likelihood of those problems with early voting than without early voting.
And I think that it also, I absolutely agree, and I would say that there's also that greater length of time to identify problems. If there are any questions about a particular vote or a particular area, then there's a longer period of time for the registrars and the city town clerks to identify that problem and address it, rather than having that huge rush on the day of election.
That
So I
makes a
think
lot of
that's
sense.
I think that's an important point.
Well, and I think it's more than a convenience for the registrars and the town clerks, because remember, we signed up for this. We are, we want to spend all of our time and attention focusing on elections and
Right.
procedures. For most voters, they only look at the election for a day or two before it happens. So election day registration was such a big victory. And actually, when you talk about fraud, I actually see fraud as a different problem. There's fraud on the news is people impersonating one another, which is exceedingly rare. But I think there is a serious problem that happens where people have out-of-date information. They vote in the wrong place because they know they wouldn't be able to vote unless they went to their old hometown. I knew I used to vote in New Haven, but now I live in Fairfield. I didn't register, so I'm going to go back. So I see these reforms that we're doing as addressing what are the actual, maybe more accurate than fraud is to call them distorting influences in our elections, things which change the outcome in a way that makes it less reflective of what voters want. So if you have people who are voting in their old hometowns, and remember, your driver's license, you only update it every 5 years. So people will go back to where their license says for years. That we found to be a little over 1% of the voters in the state. That's a pretty big number. Elections are decided by much less than that in local boards. We have some tied races, right? So election day registration addresses that. I think if you say, well, undue influence, allowing expansions of early voting to maybe decrease the need for absentee balloting, that's a solution to that. If you have people filling out ballots for their spouses, filling out ballots for people in their family who they believe they have a right to help vote, but maybe they don't, saying, well, we're going to have signature matching, or we're going to have postage paid envelopes to help students return their ballots without their parents having to be involved. those are steps that get us to a more representative system. And I think that those solve a lot of the problems that we actually experience, not concerns that people are projecting onto our system.
It's good to hear the hands-on view of the problems.
Matt, maybe you ought to clarify what is okay in terms of helping someone vote and what's not, because at this point somebody might.
People are allowed to ask for assistance from whoever they like in completing their ballot. I'm talking about scenarios where people are voting for their absent children. And every year you'll see some elections enforcement cases of a student voted in their new residence in a college town, and mysteriously a ballot also appeared for them where their family lives, and the family had been requesting ballots for a number of years. There are some high profile cases on that.
So it is clear that if one of your loved ones or a friend even asks you to help with understanding the ballot or reading the ballot or whatever,
right.
that's perfectly okay to do. The other thing I think that Matt raised that I think is important, again, always important to remind people here, is unlike some states you read about where there's a requirement that you show a driver's license, in Connecticut it's a very, very liberal provision that allows you to really just show some evidence that you are who you say you are, either a credit card with your name on it, an envelope addressed to you, your address in the district, or whatever. So there's a lot of different ways, and the registrars are aware of this. The moderators are generally aware of this. We have found over the last number of years that sometimes the poll workers are not aware of it, and
Right.
If you come across that, in addition to the thing you should do is go to the moderator, and so the moderator can be sure to educate the poll workers on that.
That's a good point, because I think just people automatically show driver's licenses and sort of assume that a driver's license is what is required, but that is not the case.
And not everyone has one. So
Yeah, well,
it's
that's
important
the
for
point why
the population
with
that does not.
Connecticut's laws
will not.
are fair
Which is
in
much
that, in that
fairer.
response. So we all have work to cut out to get this word out, as you say, programs like this, flyers. We have to. When I was having my hair cut the other day, talk to the person doing it. No, she didn't know. It's just so many
Right.
people just plain don't. And I guess it's been in the newspapers, but there hasn't been that much publicity. We
But-
can hope. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there have been some very positive editorials around the state, and I think that some of the word is getting out that way, but you're absolutely right. I spoke to an accountant the other day who absolutely had no idea this was going on, and the first thing he said, well, that's just common sense. Isn't this a common?
Yeah.
Why do we have to do it this way? But in fact, I explained that in order to amend the Constitution, you do have to do it this way. But he said, well, it just seems obvious. It's fair. It's making things better. And he thought that was, but he hadn't heard, so he wouldn't have known when he got into the
People that you
poll.
basically consider are well-educated, well-informed people don't have a clue about it.
Right, right.
So what else about voting are you concerned about in your organizations? Anything else that...
Well, I guess I might add something. Just looking forward past the amendment, I guess I'm curious, Common Cause, ACLU, what you think you'd like to see in terms of what the system should look like. Whether we should have expansive in-person, expansive absentee voting, or maybe a hybrid of the two, or an all-male voting, which some jurisdictions have
Oh, you
tried.
want female
I just want to
voting
make it
too.
clear, right? I just want to make clear that when Matt says all male voting, he means the U.S. mail system as
Yes,
opposed
US
to
mail
I
system.
just- I just said
men
Only
voting.
men voting? No.
With the ACLU, that might be good.
Well, and the League of Women Voters as well, as you could imagine.
No, I think that's a good question. Have you got any positions on that, or are you waiting until we get past the first hurdle?
Well, I'm part of a number of national voting rights organizations, and I hear positives from folks around the country, and I would very much like to hear, a little more depth about what works well in various states, and I don't see us, I will say, I don't see us moving to all mail-in voting anytime soon. I think that would be a step much farther out, and but I do see early voting and possibly weekend voting that would give folks a chance who maybe work 2 and 3 jobs to figure out how it is they can they can parse their time and actually make the opportunity to get there. So I think we don't have a specific proposal at Common Cause, but we are looking at what works well in other states and why it does.
Does ACLU?
No, we also don't have any specific proposal at this point. I think what we'd be looking at, though, is to make sure that whatever proposals are out there, the goal is to maximize voting. As I say, there have been too many instances, and we, because we've had to litigate them, we're very familiar with all the different things that are said and some of the effect that they have on voting. I think we just want to make sure that all the measures that are taken will help to maximize voting. Weekend voting is an example that I use. It's just when you look around the world and look at what happens, it's and you think about it, it's so clear that would we all spend our weekends, go to our kids' soccer games and so on, and it's a time when you have time and can go and take your kids and do something civic. So I think that's one that should be high on the list. But I think we'd be looking at what they propose and really trying to point out if there are some that we think are discriminatory in some way or another.
Well, let's just assume that you will be facing that problem. I would think that the amendment would pass. It'd be very strange for it not to, but it's still important to have people informed on it.
Absolutely. I think that not knowing and getting into the poll, I think there's a chance for folks to be confused by the language and not understand that this is an opportunity and that this isn't a final step, but that there are additional steps beyond this. And of course, our hope is that will encourage more and more people to participate. We have abysmal voting rates in this state in certain communities, and I look forward to this being one more way to boost those.
And I'd add 2 things. One is that if you're attending any candidate debates or other discussions about the election, call to people's attention that this is on the ballot, number 1, and number 2, it's a fair question to ask legislative candidates this year in terms of what proposals they would support or oppose in terms of early voting or wider absentee voting, because they are going to have to vote on that, or likely going to have to vote on that. So ask them the questions, make it clear to the audience that this is on the ballot, it needs everybody's support, and that way we can hopefully get to that next stage where we'll be delighted to have to worry about the next set of problems.
That makes sense.
And maybe one thing that I've observed around this debate, registrars will often say, we don't want to be responsible for something else in October. The town clerks, the election work is seasonal for them. They're doing town documents all year round. They don't necessarily want to see absentee ballots explode in number. And so what I'm encouraging people in my organization and other people I encounter is to remain open to sort of what will work best and to sort of welcome additional work if it's necessary to make it work better. I think one of the things that could happen if you see resistance from registrars, from town clerks, to expanding their office's operations would be to basically see the introduction of regional vote centers, to say, well, we're going to go to a regionalized system here in the state, and I know that concept has a number of supporters, and so I know that if that's something that people like having their local administration happening, that they should look for ways to be supportive of this concept and try and find ways to make it work on the ground, rather than saying, we don't want it, we can't make it work, it'll cost too much. I think it'll be the impact will be pretty modest in terms of what the gains are.
So there's education to be done at all at all levels.
Right.
To be done, and work for all of these organizations to do. Say we'll never run out of causes to be, windmills to tilt at, and things to try to accomplish. And of course, the League is working on registration of voters, having a lot of different opportunities, working at high schools and other places to get more people registered. I don't know what else we can do to increase the turnout. And the young, I was at a debate, one of the candidates' debates, and the Green Party candidate said, you know, looking out here, first he said, how many people have not made up their minds? Raise your hand, because everybody who's there had already made their mind. He says, and I think giving it the benefit of the doubt, the average age is about 45. He was giving it the benefit of the doubt. I don't know why we can't get the young people interested in coming to things like debates and learning more about the candidates.
I don't know that we do a great job of advertising debates or opportunities and the locations, and I think in certain communities we do, but I think that in others we can do more, and I think we can partner with schools and partner with organizations that specifically work with young people to say this is an opportunity to ask questions or to listen to different positions that folks might have, which I think would be a great opportunity. Schools should be partnering on these sorts of things, and I fear that schools aren't doing as much in terms of civic education as I think needs to be done, and I would certainly like to see more of that.
I wonder, Matt, do you have are there any figures out there in terms of the percentage voting, different age groups, like in a town like Fairfield?
Well, we have a number of university students. We have Fairfield University and Sacred Heart in our town, and so the numbers skew much more heavily towards presidential elections. Younger people are less consistent in their voting, and so we'll see an entirely different set of students every 4 years. So we have very little to compare to from one time to the next. The interest tracks the presidential level very closely. So I would say that there are a number of efforts to expand people's understanding of how the system works. I know Common Cause partners with a number of city-based coalitions, Hartford Votes, New Haven Votes, to try and reach people who may not know even what a registrar of voters is. They don't know where to go to register. They may not know that they need to register, to try and overcome at least those hurdles. Some of it is the responsibility of the candidates, right? You know, until candidates make themselves more interesting, that they share a portion of the responsibility for waning interest. And and you had mentioned something earlier, which is maybe the Constitution shouldn't have so much detail. Maybe we shouldn't elect as many positions. You know, I think I could ask everyone here: do you feel highly capable of choosing which people are on your zoning board of appeals? You know, what the issues at stake are, what the different office holders, what the candidates bring to that role. No matter how engaged you are, that's a difficult level of education to obtain. You know, even if you spend all of your time thinking about elections and government. So it's hard to ask that of young people. I think you need to find a way to get people who may not have long roots in a community, people who are transient, people who are renters, people who are students, to get them engaged with their surroundings. I know Hartford just considered a renter voter registration bill that would have landlords provide a voter registration card whenever someone signs a lease. So I think there are some ideas. I don't know if there's a silver bullet, though.
It reminds me that one of the restrictions out there is, I think it's Texas, if I'm not mistaken. When you register a firearm, that can serve as your voter registration, but a student ID cannot be used. So that's one of them. one of the peculiar things out there.
Be more important to do it when you get a gun than to take a book out of a library or anything like that.
Well, you know, but it is true. I think I pointed out the other day to somebody that you know, groups who are out there that have interest, whether it's the NRA with guns or student groups or any other groups out there, they all recognize that voting is very important, and it's, you know, in a sense, it's both the least and most important thing you can do. You know, it doesn't take that much time. It's so critical. You know, to whatever it is that you think is important, you want to weigh in.
You know, you say it's so hard to be informed on all the things that are going on. I think I mentioned it in one of the other television programs we did, that many years ago my husband was at work and he was talking with other people about some political affairs, and the other man said, well, how come you know all of this? My wife is a member of the League of Women Voters. And he was quite proud of that. And I would think that anybody's be proud to have somebody in the ACLU, Common Cause, and the League of Women Voters. And it's so easy to join any or all of these. As I say, I wouldn't give up my membership in any one of them for anything. And I have served on the state boards in all of them. It is such a rewarding experience, and I think more people should join organizations, and they don't have to do an awful lot. And most memberships are not that expensive, and they could just contribute more. I don't know if anybody else has any words of wisdom.
I think everybody should listen to you and join all three organizations.
That's absolutely right. And you can join all of them online as well as register to vote online. And I think that makes it even more of an opportunity for young people and folks who haven't been participating. So we certainly all encourage that.
Well, we're just about ready to wrap up. Are there any last words of encouragement you want to give to any people to join, to vote, to do anything?
Well, I guess I would say I go to a lot of citizenship ceremonies, and one of the things that I'll say when I go to these is registering to vote is really the first step. You know, you register to vote, you learn more about candidates and issues, you begin to vote, you get involved on campaigns, and then you, after a time, you get elected yourself. You serve, you advance through the system. That these things, it's a continuum, and registering to vote is only the first part. So if you are registered to vote, try and take that next step. Come to an organizational meeting, go to a political meeting, but don't stop where you are.
That sounds like good advice, and I hope everybody will follow it. And I can just urge everybody to get out there and vote, and certainly vote yes for this state amendment. And thank you all for watching. And thank you to all of you for participating.
Well, thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks for having us.
My name is Gaston Daume, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters. There are several reasons why I belong to this organization. First, I strongly believe that one of the most important functions of a citizen is to vote. This organization makes a big effort registering voters. Second, I also believe that an informed electorate is very important, and the League of Women Voters brings speakers to inform voters on important issues that are being considered for a vote. Third, this organization is a non-partisan advocacy group lobbying legislators on pertinent issues of concern to the community. Finally, I enjoy the company of women. My lawyer is a woman, my doctor is a woman, my financial advisor is a woman, and my best friend, who sometimes plays the role of my wife, is also a woman. I would like to encourage other men to join this worthwhile civic organization.